Welcome back to the deep dive. We're always digging into sustainability, but this time you sent us an article. And wow, this one really got us thinking. It's talking about sustainability, but like from a totally different angle, like an abundance-driven approach. And honestly, kind of blew our minds.
Yeah, for sure. You always hear about sustainability as like cutting back, less is more, all that. But this article flips the script and says, wait a minute, what if we looked at it through abundance instead?
Exactly. And like you said, most of the time, sustainability is all about reducing consumption, less waste, smaller footprint. This article, though, it dives into this whole idea of maximizing things instead of just minimizing them. And it really got us thinking differently about a sustainable future. Like, how does that even work? What does that even look like? And that's exactly what we're going to unpack today in this deep dive.
Well, the whole idea hinges on this fundamental principle in science. You've probably heard of it, the law of conservation of matter and energy. It basically says that matter and energy, they don't just disappear, they just change form. And this idea right here is like the bedrock of this whole abundance-based approach.
Okay, that makes sense. But to understand that more, I think we need to look at the traditional sustainability view, the one we're all familiar with. What are the main things that define that approach?
Yeah, so the traditional view, it's all about realizing, hey, our planet has limits. It's about cutting back on things that hurt the environment, trying to use less water, produce less waste, and definitely lowering those emissions that are messing with our climate.
Right, right. It's all stuff we hear about all the time. Reduce, reuse, recycle, watch your carbon footprint. But then this article is like, hold on, maybe we need to focus on maximizing instead of always minimizing. So, like, why the big switch? What's the logic behind that?
Okay, so the article argues that if we focus on amping up these natural cycles that regenerate things, we can actually make things plentiful. It's not just about doing less harm. It's about actively boosting the processes that replenish and renew stuff. And like we said, the law of conservation of matter and energy, that's the scientific backbone for this whole idea. If matter and energy don't vanish, then it becomes about managing how they change, into useful things.
Got it. Okay. So, let's talk matter. This persistence of materials thing the article mentions, what does that actually look like in our daily lives? Like, how does that affect our understanding of sustainability?
Okay, so it means we got to rethink how we look at all the stuff we use and, eventually toss out. When you throw something away, it doesn't really disappear, right? It just changes form. Maybe it sits in a landfill, gets burned, or breaks down into different chemicals. The point is, the matter itself, it's still there.
Ah, okay, I see. So that ties directly into the whole idea of waste, doesn't it? I really liked how the article put it that, quote, so-called waste is merely a transient form of matter awaiting reintegration into productive cycles. That really makes you rethink your trash can.
Totally. The concept of waste, the way we think about it now, it's like a human invention, not really a natural thing. In nature, there's no such thing as waste. One creature's garbage is another's treasure. Think of a tree in the forest. It falls, it decomposes, and all those nutrients go back into the soil. New life grows. It's a closed loop, a perfect system. This article wants us to apply that same idea to our industries and how we consume things.
Yeah, it's like nature already figured out the whole zero waste economy thing. Everything has its place, its purpose in the cycle. And like the article points out, our modern industrial ways kind of messed with that beautiful system.
Exactly. This whole linear take, make, dispose model, it goes against how the earth naturally works. We rip out raw materials, make stuff, and then chuck it out in ways that pollute and screw up the natural balance.
So how do we get back to that cyclical way of doing things? The article talks about recycling, but it seems like they're talking about it on a much deeper level than just sorting our plastic and paper.
Yeah, they call recycling a universal principle. They're saying it's not just something we do to be eco-friendly. It's literally how the universe works. They've got some pretty wild examples like the air we breathe. Those molecules have probably been floating around for ages. And the atoms in our bodies, they were forged in stars, literally. Even decomposition, they say it's not the end. It's just a matter of getting redistributed, ready for something new to grow.
It's mind-blowing when you think about it. The interconnectedness of everything, how these basic building blocks just keep going and going.
It is, and it really shows how our industrial way are like a detour from the natural order of things. The article then suggests some solutions to get us back on track. biodegradable materials that can break down and go back into nature, industrial symbiosis, where one industry's trash is another's treasure, and building cities that are like ecologically resilient so they can capture and reuse resources, stuff like organic waste and even the heat that comes off different systems.
Industrial symbiosis, that's super interesting. Like creating these industrial ecosystems that are interconnected and produce almost zero waste. I remember reading about a brewery that used its leftover grain to feed cows at a nearby farm, and then the cow manure fertilized the barley fields for the brewery. It's amazing how closing the loop can make things more efficient and reduce waste, you know?
Yeah, exactly. It's about intentionally creating those relationships in our industries so they work more like nature, less waste, more efficiency. And, speaking of resources, let's talk about energy. The article says that energy scarcity might not be about running out of energy, but more about how we're using it. Like we're just not being very efficient.
Right, right. And the article really highlights how much natural energy is constantly hitting our planet. The amount of solar energy alone is just, it's massive.
Oh, absolutely. The sun's energy that reaches Earth is way more than what we need globally. And on top of that, we have all these other continuous sources like wind, geothermal heat from inside the Earth, and the power of moving water. The article even mentions capturing waste heat from industries, the heat they just release into the environment. That's a huge potential source of energy right there.
So it seems like we have plenty of energy. The question is, can we capture it, store it, and use it effectively?
Exactly. And the article highlights all these innovations happening right now. Better ways to store energy from sources like wind and solar because they can be a bit unpredictable. Then there are circular energy systems. That's where you take so-called waste energy and find another use for it, like using waste heat to heat buildings. And then there are these localized energy grids, which are more resilient and less vulnerable compared to those big centralized power plants.
The article compares this abundance view to the typical ESG frameworks, the environmental, social, and governance stuff, which is usually all about lowering emissions and upping energy efficiency. So how are these two approaches different in terms of a sustainable energy future?
Okay, so cutting emissions and being more efficient are super important, but this abundance approach goes further. It's more proactive. It's not just minimizing the bad stuff, it's actively building these sustainable energy systems where we get good at capturing renewable energy, using energy in multiple stages so we waste less, and having these decentralized energy setups to make things more resilient and accessible. It's a bigger, more ambitious way of looking at it.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, what about water? The article has another interesting take here. It says, we should stop thinking about water as a finite resource, like something that we're constantly using up. Instead, it says we should think of it as a global resource that's always being recycled. That's a pretty big mind shift, I think, for a lot of people.
For sure. The article stresses that the Earth has this natural water cycle, evaporation, condensation, precipitation, all that. It's constantly renewing our freshwater supplies. And then you have groundwater being recharged, rivers flowing. It all plays a part. What's fascinating is that even in those drying, arid places, nature has come up with brilliant ways in collect and save water, like harvesting fog, tapping into underground aquifers. Nature's pretty smart. The article's point is that we don't really have a global water shortage. The problem is that we're mismanaging it, not distributing it well. And so some places end up with scarcity because of those things, not because there isn't enough water overall.
So it's not that there isn't enough water on the planet, it's that we're not being smart about managing it and getting it to where it needs to go.
Right. And just like with energy, the article says there are a bunch of human innovations that can help us solve these water problems. Things like desalination plants powered by renewables that lets us use the ocean, which is obviously huge. Then there are closed-loop wastewater recycling systems like they have in Singapore. They treat wastewater until it's clean enough to drink and reuse. Then there's technology that pulls moisture from the air and AI-powered smart water grids. Imagine AI analyzing tons of data about how people use water, what the weather's doing, to predict shortages and automatically adjust things to make sure water goes where it's needed and we waste less.
So again, it's not about just using less. It's about finding ways to get more clean water and manage it smarter using all this cool new tech. And the article also compares this with ESG's focus on just using less water.
Right. Reducing water use is still important, don't get me wrong, but the abundance approach focuses more on making sure everyone has enough by building resilient systems. It's about creating those circular water economies where water gets treated and reused over and over, and having these decentralized water systems so that communities can rely on their own local sources. The idea is to ensure a steady and reliable water supply, not just focus on cutting back.
So to kind of sum it all up, the article's main point is that if we really get this law of conservation of matter and energy, sustainability isn't about accepting a future of scarcity and living with less. It's about building a system where we have this cyclical abundance. So can you break that down for us? What would that kind of system look like?
Okay, so imagine a system where we're constantly taking energy from renewable sources, transforming it to power our lives, and store it efficiently. A system where we reuse, recycle, and regenerate matter in closed loops so there's barely any waste. And where everything we build, how we live, copies those efficient, cyclical, almost waste-free systems we see in nature. It's about seeing those natural cycles as the foundation of a truly sustainable future.
It's a much more positive and hopeful picture, isn't it? Instead of always feeling limited and like we have to sacrifice, we could have a future where we thrive because you're working with nature, not against it. We can be clever about how we use technology and align ourselves with these natural laws.
Yeah, it's a more optimistic view, for sure. But the article makes one super important point. Even in this abundance-driven world, we still have to make sure we're not consuming more than things can replenish, and that things are being repurposed at a pace that makes sense. Just because matter and energy don't disappear doesn't mean we can just use them without thinking. It means we have to design our systems so they constantly cycle and renew.
Right, so it's not a free pass to consume without limits, but more like a challenge to rethink everything and make sure what we take is also being given back and reused. It's a big change in how we think, moving from sustainability as restriction to seeing it as this amazing ongoing renewal process.
Exactly. It's about understanding that abundance is built into how the universe works, and then using our knowledge and our tech to build a future that aligns with that, a future that goes beyond this scarcity mindset that we're so used to.
Wow, this has been an amazing deep dive. Really makes you question a lot of assumptions about sustainability. And to you, our listener, we leave you with this. If we really embrace this idea of abundance, could it open up whole new ways to approach not just environmental problems, but other global challenges too? Could this idea of perpetual cycles be useful in things like economics or even how we build a better society? It's definitely something to think about. Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.